Ready. Back to Mr. Armstrong.
Thanks, sir. Okay. So I've got the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. He is an attorney, practiced law, but he's also run companies, and he's known for innovation and great turnaround. And I will tell you that for the time I was at CBP, his team really helped me build some of the best risk management targeting systems, I think, in the world. So with that, Peter, if you could come up.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. We got chairs all over. Be careful. Okay, thanks, everyone. We will spend the next, thank you again. We'll spend the next 20 minutes or so hopefully giving everyone an introduction, to the extent that you haven't yet been introduced, to the National Cybersecurity Moonshot. It is a very serious effort, which has the potential to have very important consequences. I'll lay out kind of where we are, how we got there, and then what lies ahead for us. You know, this conference has been, the CES and then the CESG conference, have really focused on technologies, as you would expect, 5G, AI, blockchain, and I think we've all heard some great presentations about both the kind of the potential, the promise of those technologies. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the dark side, about the dangers of those technologies, dangers to our privacy, dangers to the economy. You know, the economy has become more and more dependent on all things technical. And we as a society, particularly the United States as a leader in this, are more vulnerable than we've ever been. That's not something to be scared about. It's something to take action about. And so what the cybersecurity moonshot is about is really flipping the script. Historically, when you have a vulnerability, whether it's a zero-day vulnerability or otherwise, everybody is working to go patch that, to go get out a fix. It's a very short-term focus. Even those companies that have longer-term focuses are really looking at their core software and saying, you know, how do we build some more protection into this? And how do we do it over the next 6 months, over the next year? So what you're going to hear is about an entirely different approach. What you're going to hear over the next 20 minutes is an approach that says, let's take the long view around cybersecurity. And if we take the long view, what's the world of the possible? How do we get from here to there? So this work has been done on behalf of NSTAC. Those of you may be familiar with NSTAC. NSTAC was chartered in 1982 by President Reagan and thereafter became a permanent part of the government when later in 1982, Congress formally authorized NSTAC. NSTAC has a budget, started under the auspices of the NSA, and then when Homeland Security was established, it moved under the auspices of Homeland Security, but maintains very close relationships with a number of government agencies. Our job is varied, but one of the core components of NSTAC is to advise the President on cybersecurity. We have, over the course of time, expanded our membership. There are approximately 20 companies who are represented in NSTAC. Some of them are the usual suspects, as you would expect. So whether it's Microsoft or Apple or Verizon or AT&T or Harris or Palo Alto Networks or Unisys. NSTAC has a revolving chairmanship, and it also works through subcommittees. The particular subcommittee we're going to talk about today is the Cybersecurity Moonshot Subcommittee, which has two co-chairmen, Mark McLaughlin of Palo Alto Networks and myself. So that's the background, but NSTAC is a standing unit and has been active for more than 35 years and has been remarkably successful over those 35 years in having the administration, whichever party, support and adopt its reports. So this is not an organization that simply files a report. The reports actually get acted on. So what is the cybersecurity moonshot all about? I only put the first part here just to get everybody a little excited, to make the internet safe and secure. That's a great goal. It is not actually a goal that most of you would expect to be achievable, and frankly, neither do I. So there's a second part to that. It's make the internet safe and secure for critical transactions. And critical transactions can mean the banking sector, it can mean government activities, it can mean work in certain commercial activities. But we are not intending by this action to completely redo the internet. We are intending to create, if you will, an expressway that is part of the internet. It's not a separate internet, it's part of the internet. And when you're on that expressway, life gets much more secure, but there are consequences to that security. And so we'll go over that. So, can we do this? You know, there's always a fair amount of skepticism whenever you use the word moonshot, and certainly when you talk about the internet. So I want to go back to why we chose the moonshot term. Those of you who are familiar with the original moonshot was stated in 1961 by President Kennedy, and it was to get a man to the moon. He said a man, not a person, but we would now say a person, and to get that person to the moon and safely back. He set a goal of 10 years to do that. And at the time when he did that in 1961, we did not as a country or as a civilization have the technology to be able to do that. We just didn't. We had some ideas, but we didn't have the technology. So it was an audacious goal. It was done in response to the Russian Sputnik crisis. So it was seen as we were losing our technology edge, and it was an enormous goal. At some point, the spending on the original moonshot got up to 6% of all federal government spending. So it was enormous. It is in some ways similar to what we're doing and in some ways different. It was audacious, yes. We didn't have the answers then. We don't really have the answers now. So one thing that to keep in mind is we're setting a 10-year horizon for this. And unlike that moonshot, it's actually a moving target. Now you could say, well, the moon moves, but astrophysics is such that even in 1961, we knew exactly where the moon was going to be at any moment in the future. So we knew where we were going and where we had to get back. We actually don't know. I mean, everybody in this room understands the accelerated pace of AI, of 5G, of biometrics, and of quantum. And that this is going to be a much different world in 3, 5, and 10 years. So what we had to do with the cybersecurity moonshot was to say this isn't a singular goal. This is going to be a moving target. We have to set up a framework, an organization. We have to set up a methodology so that we're going to be able to stay ahead of the curve on cyber and do it for a consistent period of time. So it is not that we were prescriptive with answers. We really are directive with approach. But in that directive approach, we got very substantive, which we'll talk about in a minute. So what did we do? Well, one of the really interesting things when you step back and say you're going to solve something over 10 years is you don't actually have to do something tomorrow. And so when you have a patch that has to be fixed, you basically have one choice. You engage your leading technologists to go fix the patch. That's what you do. But when you say you're doing something over 10 years, all of a sudden you have a lot more tools. You have what we ultimately will call a whole-of-nation effort. But the tools you have go beyond simply technology. So while technology is one of our 6 pillars, it is one of our 6 pillars. So we expanded this effort to talk about behavior. We had amazing behavioral scientists as part of this effort. We talk about education. And education gets very broad. When you have 10 years, you have time not only to figure out how are you going to educate people at K through 12 or in college or in graduate, but how do you incentivize people to get into STEM? How do you incentivize people who get doctorate and master's degrees to stay in the United States and continue to do this work? On policy, we talked not only about the sticks of regulation, but the carrots of incentive. And there are more carrots in our approach than there are sticks. Privacy was a core from the get-go. So understanding the privacy implications and trade-offs in getting a more secure internet for critical government and commercial functions, it was something we started in the very first meeting and will be here for 10 years. And finally, ecosystem. How do all of these things relate? How do you get 1 + 1 = 3? Now, I will tell you, the group that worked on this was not small. Tom Patterson is in the room. Tom was the co-chair of the working group, along with his parallel at Palo Alto, for this project, and he's our chief trust officer at Unisys. And one of the really fascinating things that started to happen, we had 20 companies, multiple government agencies, and 30 expert briefers involved in this over the course of well over a year. And it's really interesting when you get leading technologists in the same room as behavioral academics. Those two tend not to necessarily talk the same language, but they did really quickly. So that's one of the differentiators of this effort, is it really goes not only beyond a normal time frame, but it goes beyond technology. That said, this is not something that will start today and finish in 10 years. We expect the results of this to begin to bear fruit very quickly and continue to bear fruit over that 10-year period. Okay. So is it impossible? Well, I think the first thing we have to do is raise the stakes of the discussion. So, we've had, as a country, this kind of growing discussion about what is the importance of cybersecurity. And one of our threshold commitments in this project was to say that cybersecurity is national security. We have to just kind of stop futzing around with that and just lay that out there. So what might be impossible if you could not get the appropriate focus on something becomes possible if you're willing to put the time and resources and attention into it. So it's a very important statement. You see various agencies, kind of struggling with this. You see the press kind of struggling with this. If you're going to do a presidential moonshot, you have to lay out why you're doing it. This is our Sputnik, right? This is to say that cybersecurity is national security, right? Now, if you were in the Ukraine, if you were in Estonia, if you were in other countries that have really had, decimating cyber attacks, that might be easier. In the US, although we've had, multiple cyber attacks, it's hard to see right now that the general population has said we have had that Sputnik moment. So we got a choice. We can wait till that happens and then declare this, or we can do it now. And so our view is it's time to do it now. So who has to do it? What is the it? So the it here is a whole of nation effort. So you saw those 6 pillars that reach through an enormous part of the population. And to make this happen, we think we actually have to reach beyond even the people in those 6 pillars. So from a government standpoint, we believe, and the report is clear, that this has to start with a national council made up of secretaries of the key agencies in the government. It has to be accompanied by key private sector and academia at the council. We're calling for an executive director who will be at the White House level, who will lead this. So unlike the NASA approach, there is not one government agency that can do this, although Homeland Security's new CISA is extremely well positioned to carry a lot of the burden. But we do think that we need a, if you will, a whole of government effort that has the private sector immediately and involved from the get-go. And then from a communication sector, as you think about education and policy, as you think about behavior, how do we incentivize people to do this, this quickly becomes not only a whole of government effort, but a whole of nation effort. And that's our approach. So 2019 is the start. We formally presented the report to the White House in November of 2018. That report is now under review. There are a bunch of people who are starting to do work to execute on that report, but it has not yet officially been launched. One of the things I'm here to do with this group is to say, learn about it, get ahead of the curve, so that when it gets officially launched, you can already participate. In fact, you can participate now. So you can go to the NSTAC website and get the report, or you can go to the Unisys website under unisys.com Moonshot, and you'll get a bevy of materials. So how likely is this going to succeed? Can we really pull this off? So I'll tell a final story, again, about President Kennedy. So when he launched it, there was not the technology to do this. There wasn't really the organization to do it, because NASA was just a fraction of what it would ultimately become. But there was a clear directive to do it. So one day, President Kennedy is actually at NASA headquarters, visiting the scientists who are working on this. And he goes to the bathroom. This was earlier days. Presidents went to the bathroom then and didn't have a bevy of security. He just went to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, there was a janitor working in the bathroom, and the janitor was scrubbing the floor. And the president, maybe somewhat absent-mindedly, asked the janitor, said, you know, what are you doing? And the janitor looked up and said to the president, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon. And that was the moment President Kennedy later said that he knew we were going to be able to do that. So that's what we're looking for with this effort. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. We're about to bring up a panel on a different subject. But I do want to impress everyone that this is very, very serious work. And we feel very committed as a group of companies, as a group of government agencies, to make this happen. This can be a difference maker for us going forward. So I know we're out of time. Well, we have actually 3 minutes left. So if anybody has a question, I'll take it.
A quick question.
Yes.
Two questions. The first is, how much will this cost us? And number two is, why should I trust you? You said that you've managed this organization for 35 years. That's 6 administrations. You said that the president's remarkable success and the reports throughout. But that's over 6 administrations. And then you said that cyber is really, you know, we don't understand it. So you're now telling me I should get behind the boogeyman of a moonshot, put cyber behind it. You haven't told me how much it's going to cost. And I don't know if I trust you.
Okay. Well, first of all, 35 years is a long time. And NSTAC has not been doing cybersecurity for 35 years because it didn't kind of exist 35 years ago. So it has been an evolving organization. Started with telecommunications. So started in the aftermath of the breakup of AT&T. And how do you make sure in a period of national emergency or war, those 8 companies are actually going to communicate with each other? So that the whole framework of making sure that those long-distance companies would communicate with each other was really the first thing it did. And it has evolved in a series of actions since then, from data center infrastructure to supply chain and now to cybersecurity. How much is it going to cost? Not known right now, right? So again, this is directive, not prescriptive. But one of the hallmarks of the program is to say, look, there are certain elements of this recipe where we're not doing what we need to do. When you look at quantum computing, and we look at the money being devoted today by quantum in various countries around the world, at the national level as opposed to the private industry level, I think it's safe to say there's a view that we are underspending in the United States on quantum research and development. And if you believe that quantum is one of those areas where coming in second is not really going to help you very much, then that is something that is going to require more spending and probably less reliance in the United States on private industry. Because those companies are American-based but have global responsibilities. So we have a concept in the report about grand challenges. and we do need to fund grand challenges. But beyond that, there's an enormous amount that's being spent by these government agencies today on cyber in a relatively disparate way. So, you know, one of the ideas is to make sure that you're really kind of getting everybody marching in the same direction. So a lot of work to be done, but it has to start. And honestly, it's not happening right now. We do not have a national kind of whole-of-nation effort to do this. But that's a great question. One more question? Yes, sir.
I applaud the idea of a moonshot, but I guess the concern I have, especially for the time frames we're talking about, a moonshot's about physics, and cybersecurity is more about ecology and biology. It's constantly evolving. I mean, I didn't think when I began my career as an engineer that I'd be taking my cues from an online bookstore, but here we are. So
Right.
I like the idea of a challenge, but how else do you see this evolving? How else do you see bringing in some of the disruptors to this?
Well, you know, it's also a great question. I think that's why we acknowledge that the analogy goes only so far, right? And right up front, there's a self-awareness that unlike that first moonshot, where you knew exactly where you were going and what you needed to win, here winning is not a singular point, right? Winning is going to be a long march that's going to be with us, honestly, forever. But the kinds of things we can do, we think will be dramatic, but have trade-offs. So this super highway inside the internet preserves the anonymity of the existing internet when you're on the existing internet. But to kind of the stakes to play in a more secure environment are, you know, you're going to lose anonymity. There has to be accountability. So it is a different approach that says when you're doing banking transactions or when you're doing critical government activities on the internet, you need to be knowledgeable, you need to have your privacy protected, but there is also going to be trade-offs. So the analogy is not perfect, but the effort is very significant and very much a change from where we are today. With that, I want to thank everyone, and we're going to move to I've got double duty today, so we're going to move to